Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Revolution. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Jay Baker here, live and direct. You know what? Let's get this done correctly. Hope you all had a good week. I think the sound is about to get a little bit better here. There we go. So, good morning. Welcome to Revolution Gathering. Hope you're well, man. It's been a tough week. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I think we've all been having tough weeks here. It sounds like from a lot of my friends and family and folks like that. So last week, our good buddy Josh told me that he was going to be stepping down into this month, and we are going to miss him. He has been such a great help over the past few years. He set up our website. He's done all the posting of all this stuff. He's finally, I've gotten the handle of posting on YouTube, but he still does all the posting for the podcasts and things like that. So we're gonna have to work on me doing that, or maybe my friend Brian, who's got a computer. I don't know how it's going to work, but we're getting all that stuff together over the next month and doing that. But Brian just is such a busy guy, and he's always worked really tough to get us in his schedule, and he just needed some time. So just if you get a chance to, he's I Hate the Canadian on Instagram. If you get him a chance, drop him a like, say hello, get to know him. He's an incredible guy. We're still going to be buddies, so that's all good, and I'm looking forward to that. Probably less pressure talking about Revolution. It's so funny, every time I do these talks, I always have to look behind me to see if my kids left anything completely crazy on the shelf behind me. Sometimes I like to add fun stuff to the shelf. I'll give you a tour of the shelf one day if you want. But yeah, so that happened, and then the same day we found out, unfortunately, the Tammy Faye on Broadway show is closing on December 8th, which is really, really tough. It's a really great show. I hope anybody in New York, or who's going to be in New York before December 8th, goes out and sees it. I was really hoping it would at least go to, January or February. I think it's really good during. It's something that we need near night now, and that's the tough part I think about it. It's not just that it's my mother. It's just something that I think we need as a country right now, as divided as we are. Seeing the example of how my mother worked with people, crossing all sorts of boundaries, and never letting anything get in the way of love and grace. So it's really tough to see that show close. And the cast is just, I've gotten to know a lot of them really well, and we're friends, and we've exchanged phone numbers, we text, and direct message each other. And, they really had their heart in this production. And that was one of the things I just meant so much to me. And it was really such an honor to be able to, it was an honor to meet Elton John. It was an honor to meet all those, the people, the producers and the people who made it happen. But to meet this cast and to share with them the experiences that I had, and that the fact that some of the people they were playing, obviously I knew most of those folks, and that was just wild. But yeah, even you can even send them messages, the Tammy Faye on Broadway folks, and let them know how encouraged you are and how much you're. I think it would make a good musical. It would be interesting enough that way. But anyhow, that's just my 2 cents. These are my nicotine lozenges that I used to quit smoking years ago, but for some reason now I can't quit these. I just can't quit you. And they're tasty. Cherry flavor today. So that happened, and then of course we lost a giant in, of a preacher and a theologian and a social justice activist, Reverend Tony Campolo. His wife, Peggy, was a mentor of mine, really helped me come around to being affirming. And Tony, I got to become friends with him through that, and he let me be a part of the creation of when they started the Red Letter Christian thing, and we had a lot of great conversations. He always teased me, asking me if I was taking a nap because I was so exhausted from my last nap. Um, he was hilarious. We used to speak at a lot of the same Christian festivals, and I was always happy because I was like, oh, there's another liberal that I can go talk to. And, back then I remember Clinton was president and I'd be like, we've got to pray for our president. And people would get like, oh, and then I would go talk to him and he would be like, I talked to him this morning, So it was really always wild to talk to Tony and hear his stories. And, his books are incredible. His son Bart really helped my career as well, got me into a lot of different things and really loved me and cared for me and was a big part of my life, especially in Brooklyn. And that whole family has been so wonderful to me. But so we lost him that day as well. So it was a heavy day and kind of a heavy week. But luckily I've had my kids around here to kind of keep me focused on them and everything. But I got a chance to do an interview with, about a little bit about Tony, and that'll be out soonish, I think. And so I'll keep you updated with that. Anyhow, I've got a speaking engagement coming up next month, and that's pretty wild. I'm pretty excited about that. So I'll be actually speaking live on December 8th here in Seattle. I will be posting all the details. There's a little flyer being made that I'm going to go ahead and put up on all the social medias, and I'll probably even just post it here on YouTube as well for that. But what we're going to try to get through today is something I often talk about. Quite a bit of pushback, probably from everybody I know, is disagreeing and the different levels of how we disagree with each other. Oh, Shane Claiborne. I did an interview with Shane Claiborne as well. And so that was really interesting. Me and Shane hadn't talked in quite a few years. And I got interviewed by Shane. And I think you guys will like that, the two of us coming together. Because we're very different thinkers, And we used to argue about different things in the past, but we were always friends. But we came up around the same time. And it was interesting to be like, oh, now we're almost 50. What does this conversation look like? We were at the first Red Letter Christians together. They always roomed us together, like, get those two young weirdos together, and now we're like middle-aged weirdos. So, interesting enough, I forgot to mention that. So, I was laying in my bed where I usually have all these thoughts at night because I can't sleep. And I had been getting quite a bit of pushback on disagreeing well and arguing well and just the different levels of that. And so I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, well, what's the difference between agreeing, disagreeing, agreeing to disagree, and then disagreeing well, and then arguing and arguing well or better. What do these look like? And there's been a quote that's gone around, and I'll share that with you now. And it's been attributed to James Baldwin, and it says, when we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. The thing is that James Baldwin never said this. So that's interesting enough. This was actually put on Twitter by an author named Robert Jones Jr. He used to go by Son of Baldwin. Because I guess Baldwin had such an inspiration on, but it was a tweet from a guy named Robert Jones Jr. I think he might still be on X. I don't know. I'm not on there anymore. And it was in, I think, like August of 2015 that he wrote this. Now, so often people put this quote up and there's a picture of James Baldwin. It says James Baldwin. But James Baldwin never said this. Now, one of the reasons I'm bringing this quote up, because I don't think it's a bad quote, but I think there's some problems with the quote, and I think in some ways it encourages us not to disagree with folks who don't see us as humans. Now you might say, well, Jay, what do you know that as a straight male? I know a lot about that. I know a lot about that in the church. I know that a lot about my last name. I know a lot of that with my thinking. I know what it's like to be seen as a pastor in quotations constantly, and not recognized as part of a community. I've had some of that, not probably as harsh as a lot of people have, but there are times where, I walk into a church and hear jokes about my family and talked about my argument, things like that. We all have our own experiences, and I honestly think it doesn't need to be about like the hierarchy of suffering. Suffering and pain is something that we all go through, and I think can be something that brings us together. But there were some issues with this one that I always had, and to be honest with you, part of the probably biggest issues was people like, we have to have, without people like Dr. King and John Hume and Bayard Rustin, Bayard, I always get his first name wrong, Reverend Rustin, no, it wasn't Reverend, Bayard Rustin, that's it. Without, people like that and Gandhi and folks like that who were willing to go and be with that, or people like Nelson Mandela and things like that, we don't grow, we don't move if there's no discourse. So we're going to talk about that today. And so I was going to use my daughter's iPad to get on the Merriam-Webster dictionary, but I couldn't figure out how to load the app because it's my daughter's and I didn't have all the right codes. So then I went on just the other thing, just the Safari, and looked it up. But then the thing keeps shutting down and I can't switch back and forth. So I just frantically got in my car and ran to my local bookstore, Third Place Books, and bought one of these. Because see, I do all this on my phone and I don't have a computer. So when the grid goes down, you guys want to know what words mean, I have it right here. So I bought a dictionary because I thought this would be important stuff to look at today. So we're going to look at these words. I know it's ridiculous. Please like and subscribe too. My son always reminds me to tell Dad, you got to get him to like and to subscribe. He's like, tell him if you get 100,000. Yesterday he said, tell him if you get 100,000 followers, which were quite a far away, so I'm not too worried. He's like, you'll take your hat off. I'm like, I'm pretty sure people have seen it. He's like, yeah, but that'll be really exciting. And then you'll get, I guess they give you like an award or something, or they give you, so you can put it, look, I have 100,000 followers on Facebook. I mean, YouTube. Anyhow, I don't know. So we're going to look at these today. So please bear with me as we check out the old dictionary. I had sold all my dictionaries because I thought, I'm a technical guy. Now I realize that I got to have it. So it's kind of nice to have. But we're going to look at agree. I know this seems so simple, but I think it's important for us to know the meanings of words and what we're dealing with. And even if it's something that we feel that we need to push back against, we do. Because see, we're coming into a time where there's going to be a lot of disagreements. Now, one of the things like this James Baldwin quote, which is not a James Baldwin quote, this Robert Jones Jr. quote, it is often we hear things and take them for face value, especially in this day and age. We see things online or in Instagram and things like that, and we kind of get this misinformation, and we accept it for facts and things like that. And so often, we need to look deeper into things. We need to practice critical thinking, especially within this world we're in now, and with having Donald Trump as president. It's very confusing. We're all kind of like, what the heck is happening? What's going to happen? So we need to be able to try to have some of our facts right. It's really easy to switch blame and do things like that. And so I think it's important that we try to research things and we know what we're talking about. And that will really help you disagree well or argue well and allow you to do that. So an agreement. What is an agreement? Agree, agreed, agreed. I'm reading Webster's dictionary. Agreeer. I'm an agreeer. That's the... For agree, at will, from Latin, ad, agree, will, pleasure. Great comes from gratuum, gracious, and it actually goes back to even agreeable, pleasing, agreeable, more at grace. Isn't that interesting that grace has a connection to agreeing? So, to conquer in as an opinion, admit, concede that they are right, to consent, to settle on, to common consent. I agree to the rental terms with the views or wishes of another. To agree to a plan, to accept and concede something. So, that's accept. We all get that, right? So that's what it means for us to agree on something. That's the most obvious one. And then there's disagree. Let's look at that. Disagree. Me. Whoa. To refuse, assent, and then it tells all the words it comes from. But let's just read the meaning. To differ in opinion. He disagreed with me on every topic. To cause discomfort or distress, which means like fried foods disagree with me, like me, raw onions totally disagree with me. But to differ in opinions, so that is to disagree. Now, we often talk about disagreeing well and having different opinions. And so, what Robert Jones Jr. is saying is we can disagree on certain things, but oppression and denial of my humanity is off the table. Well, he doesn't even say we can disagree and still love each other unless. Now, my thing is that I think we've got to love each other no matter what, but we don't have to like each other, and we don't have to agree with one another. And disagreeing is a powerful tool in our arsenal that I think we often don't realize. Like, it's really important if you're someone who can disagree with other people, even on, because like I said before, without Dr. King saying, well, I'm going to, meeting with racists and meeting with people like that, we wouldn't have seen the change we had. Often in my work, back when I was working with Soul Force, it was meeting with people and we disagreed with, that we saw the most effect, because we were able to recognize one another's humanity, and they were able to recognize my LGBTQ brothers and sisters who were with me's humanity, and it seemed to make more sense than any biblical. And it wasn't. Some of these people did not change. Some of them didn't. Some of them did slightly change, but for me, the focal point was not, I've got the scripture right here. It was, we recognize one another's humanity. So, to disagree on a topic, on another's life, on another's opinion, to sit in front when someone says, well, I don't see your right to exist, you're literally voicing, I am right here and I exist. I saw someone the other day was asking this woman who's trying to bring priests in the Middle East with Gaza and stuff, and they said, do you recognize Israel's right to exist? And she goes, I don't know what you mean. It does exist. There's no right or not right. It exists. This is the reality. Here it is. It's a place that actually exists. It doesn't matter what I recognize or don't recognize. It exists. And so there's that idea of allowing people to know we exist. One of the great things about when my mom interviewed my friend Steve at PTL in like 84, 85, was that he was gay, he had AIDS, he was a Christian, and he was a pastor. So people could say we don't think they have the right to do that, or they don't do that, or they shouldn't exist, or they can't exist, or whatever. But the point is they exist. He exists. Steve exists. That was a powerful point of that. It's like, this is the reality. And we can have compassion towards these people who exist. We don't have to demonize them. We do not have to deny their existence. Matter of fact, we are called to see their humanity, to see their existence. Okay? Sorry if I get a little too preachery talk on you. But this is the one I really liked. I was like, is this going to make any sense? Like me trying to get people to understand what the dictionary says. But I think it's important that we know what words mean, and we don't forget the meaning of these words. Because we've made disagreeing into this horrific thing, because we've seen so many people treat each other so horribly, especially on the internet and on social media, that we've turned it into like this impossible thing where we all, I know even me, I get a little tense. I'm a recovering people pleaser too, but like when disagreement, and it's like, I remember one time when I got treated really badly at Heritage USA after we had lost it. I went and the security guards kicked me off the property, and I was crying. I was really upset. And my mom being my mom, says, well, at least they can't eat you, honey. And I was like, Mom, that doesn't help. But what she was saying is like, they're not going to kill you. Nothing's changed. I mean, yeah, they can kick you off, tell you to leave, but that's still part of your life. That's still part of your, I mean, nothing has changed. You know, just because they have a different opinion than you or they don't welcome you, you're still you. You still know where you stand in that situation. You're hurt because you know what they did wrong, but they didn't kill you. They didn't do these things. And I think so often we're so afraid of conflict and argument that we create these ideas and these arguments into monsters and think that there's no way to solve them. When I'm reading psychology, it tells me these are possible. When I'm reading philosophy, it tells me these are possible. When I'm reading theology, it's telling me it's possible. When I'm reading the Bible, it's telling me it's possible. So all these things are saying, like, you know, a lot of like Paul's writings are about people arguing and fighting and him trying to bring them together and reconcile them. It's possible. Would you tell me 20 years ago that there's going to be Elton John's going to do a musical about your mother one day? I would have been like, I don't think so. If you would have told me that in like 87, I would have been like, no one's ever going to do a musical. Not even off Broadway or a film or this or a documentary. You know, no one's going to think I ever see my family in a positive light again. But they did. You know, so there's also that to take in. It's time that we do exist, that we are people, that we are strong, and that other people's opinions are just other people's opinions. You know, one of the things I learned in the 12-step program was what other people think of me is none of my business. That's just their ideas. That's just their thoughts. You know, and often it's misinterpreted. It's misinformation. And so when we feel and so passionate about something, you know, when we protest, well, we're going to go protest. Protesting is saying, I disagree with this. And I'm holding a sign that says it. So we do disagree. You know, if we didn't care about these people and didn't care about other people outside, we wouldn't disagree. Like Camus says that when we rebel, first it might seem for us, but when we really rebel, we realize that it's injustice not just for us, but injustice for all people. So if arguing is also a way of us rebelling against the standard, rebelling against the powers that be or things like that, that's us confronting injustice. So when we argue well and we disagree well, it's a way of seeing that this is us practicing social justice. This is us practicing justice. You know, we're not just forgiving it and we're just going to, because there's also agree to disagree, which is the one that kind of always drives me a lither bit more crazy than all of the other ones. Well, we'll just agree to disagree. And I feel like maybe that's more of what Robert Jones is saying here, is the agree to disagree type of thing. First of all, agree to disagree sounds kind of like jumbo shrimp, you know, jumbo, big, small. But it's also, you know, that's what we often hear, that agree to disagree. I don't agree. I always see people, like, especially my liberal brothers and sisters right now, saying like, the people who always say we can agree to disagree are always the conservatives, are always the bastards who say that. You know, and I'm like going like, oh, I'm one of those bastards and I'm not a conservative. I kind of leave agreeing to disagree for, I don't even do this completely with my family, but I've done it with my father, trying to get my relationship back. And that was kind of a last ditch effort to try to win my dad back. I think it was the disagreeing that maybe separated us. But we tried. And then I said, hey, listen, I'm willing to just leave all that stuff aside and just, you can make your grandfather to the kids, just let the kids, you can be their granddad. And that didn't work out, but I know I tried. You know, I know I tried. So often we can't, you know, if the other party isn't willing, then we have an issue. But I think we should be the party, we should be the people that are always willing to disagree and disagree well, because it's not just on the basis of who we are, but it's the basis of standing up for everyone. It's also setting people free from misinformation. You know, we're also... Now, Pete Rollins has another great view of this, and we're going to talk about that in a second because it's important. So I'm going to save it for there. But let's look up, what does it say about arguing? Because we looked at agree, we looked at disagree. Now let's look at arguing. To argue, that's the one we're always like, you know, oh, argue. We think is the bad one, but look what the meaning of arguing is. To argue. to argue, to reprove, argue, and demonstrate, to prove, argue to give reasons for or against something. You hear that? To give reasons for or against something. To contend a disagree in words, a dispute. To give evidence of, to indicate the facts. To consider the pros and cons of, to discuss. Asking for a chance. When they say you go to a court case, he's going to argue the case. To persuade by giving reason. Now, nothing here says that we're screaming at each other or that we're yelling at each other or that it's bad. But somehow we've turned like arguing into this way of being bad, when arguing is really just a type of communication. It's proving your case. It's proving your point. It's letting people know what's going on. It's not always easy. I don't know if it was ever meant to be in social media, but this is to consider the pros and cons, to give evidence, to prove or to try to prove by giving reason, to persuade by giving reasons. And I think if any of us want to do that, we want to persuade people. I often think of my LGBTQ brothers and sisters and my black brothers and sisters is, people don't sometimes realize the strength they hold with just being within the presence of other human beings is by persuading people to see their humanity. Persuading people to see the humanity of them. I know that people are often shocked when they meet me. You're more down to earth. Oh, you're different than I thought you'd be. Oh, you're about and because they have all these things like, well, he's Baker, he's Jim's kid, but he's also Tammy's kid, but he's also a preacher, he's also a Christian. Yeah, and so there's all these preconceived, and so I'm sitting down explaining who I am, and sometimes it's even like an arguing. I'm arguing who I am. I've had to argue with people that I'm actually a Christian. Like, oh, you're not really a Christian, And it's like, well, okay, well, I'm cool. I'm a follower of JC, whatever. But the point is we don't understand each other without being able to argue our case at times, to be arguing who we are. And how we do this in a way that's really graceful and loving and caring, and that allows us into people's lives. And you know what? To everything, turn. There is a time. I have a friend the other day who I was with who was having a horrific time with some things. Now, I didn't agree with everything they were saying, but in that moment, I knew what they needed. They didn't need me to disagree. They didn't need me to argue. They didn't need me to even agree necessarily. What they needed was to be heard. And so I sat there and I listened. And I just listened to them and talked to them and affirmed their pain and affirmed their fears. And added what little things I could to say, try to add some peace to it, but not too much, because I knew that what they needed was not me to fix the situation. They needed to express their feelings and their fear and what they were going through and how they were handling it. And I learned a lot. And we're still continuing to have this conversation. We're actually going to talk on the phone, hopefully this week, more about it. There's one more thing that I thought I would look up, and that is well, because I'm always putting well on the end of everything. So let's look at that for a second, and then I can get into the really fun part over here. Well, it's got a lot of different meanings. The word well will make you understand why the English language really stinks for people, especially like myself with dyslexia, or if you're learning it as another second language or third language or whatever. There's a lot of wells to get through. But this is the well for adverb better, which we would also say. Where we go? Where are you? Number one. In a good or proper manner, justly or rightly, satisfactory, with respect in conduct or action, in a kindly and friendly manner, spoken, with skill or aptitude, an expertise or excellent, satisfactorily, the plan worked. It went well. So somehow, when I disagree well, people get a little bit nuts. But now I'm going to go back to arguing well, because I think arguing is less is actually less conflict in arguing than in disagreeing. Arguing, you're just saying this is my case. This is what's going. This is what I believe. This is who I am. This is me. Disagreeing is like, this is why. So arguing is just giving your case. So it's funny how we just kind of switch those words and their meanings around. And just culturally, we're like, well, I'd rather disagree than argue. Are we going to have an argument? You know what I mean? Like, should be like, are we going to have a disagreement? Can I argue first? Can I argue my case? Maybe we should be thinking of it in that sense of the term. One of the things that Dr. Rollins has said to me, Peter Rollins, has said, disagreeing can allow us to see ourselves through others' eyes. He does this thing called atheism for Lent, and it's often where you go and you hear what different people think about Christians and things like this, and why they don't like Christianity, and the whole point is so you can kind of understand how other people view you and see you. Now, this doesn't mean that because someone sees you in a certain way, you're going to be like, okay, you got me. It's the idea that it gives us a deeper understanding of who that person is and how they see us and how they're responding to us. I mean, you often see these really, oh, of course the liberals think this, or oh, of course the conservatives think that. So you do get an idea of how they see us as a whole often, each other as a whole. But when we're able to disagree, we're able to have this another type of empathy. We're actually able to go and say, oh my gosh, they see me this way. This is how they perceive me, which what allows us to say, maybe argue our case a little bit better and go, actually, I see what you're saying there, and I can understand why you'd think that, but actually this is what I believe, or this is what I think, and I feel like that I live in that all the time. I think people always assume things about me. They assume, oh, he must be rich. Oh, he must have a picture. Oh, he must be he must be a snob. Oh, and I'm trying to like constantly just like, oh no, I'm not a snob. It's just I have kids and I have 2 jobs and I have to do all this different stuff, and life is really rough right now. So I have to kind of argue my case of just being human being. Not always so easy, but so often you can realize, oh, well, this is why they're so upset with me, or this is why they have this opinion of me, because they have it's that one thing of their business. What they think about me is their business, but then it becomes my business when it starts becoming towards me or towards people I love and care about, which unfortunately now seems like it's all of humanity. So I'm often giving cases on both sides of why we should argue well and why we should. I'm often arguing about why we should argue well and disagree well. I did some of that with, there's a longer version of the interview I did with, gosh, what's his name? I just said it and now it's gone. Shane Claiborne. The argument, I had to argue some things of why I see people and see politics and see certain things the way I do. I had to argue my case with him and say, well, you got to think about this and you got to think about that. And I think this is why John Hume, when in the Troubles during the Civil War in Ireland, when he said we all, the Catholics and Protestants, we have to all be at the table and we have to decide the future of Northern Ireland together. And that's going to require constantly us arguing, but arguing in the Webster dictionary, in the dictionary idea, not necessarily in the our social media way, or disagreeing with each other and having those disagreements and having those talks. And when we're arguing, we're not agreeing to disagree. When we're arguing, we're putting our case forward. We're expressing why we are, what we're trying to communicate. We're not agreeing to disagree. I will say this: we do not have to like others, but I do think we need to love them. And I believe that's what Christ called us to. I believe that's what Dr. King said. I believe that's what John Hume would say. We don't have to like their opinion. And maybe agreeing to disagree is just, well, we're going to go out and have a drink together and we're going to talk about other things. But eventually the agree. This is another thing that I learned with working with Mr. Rollins and him being my best mate is when we refuse to disagree and avoid conflict, it inevitably will lead to a type of war. So when we refuse to disagree and avoid conflict, will inevitably lead to us hurting one another in some sort of way. Because we aren't willing to state our case. We're not willing to communicate with one another. So eventually there will be some sort of fight or some trying to make our convictions into laws and things like that, which I think is always gets really messy and gross, or it leads to war where, people are killing each other, as we see it happening in the Middle East. Is there's no disagreeing, there's no arguing, it's war. This is it. There has to be a winner and there has to be a loser. Now there are so arguing well is there's no demonization in the other, even if they do it to you when you're arguing well. You could, they might demonize you. Don't return the favor. I've been demonized. I've been told I was a heretic and all this kind of stuff, and I was leading people into hell, and the Pied Piper, come to hell with me, all this kind of stuff. I don't believe in it, but we're all still going. But it didn't mean I had to turn around and do the same thing. As Nietzsche said, when fighting monsters, one has to be very careful not to become a monster. So that's also, and I would even say that when disagreeing with monsters or disagreeing with monstrous concepts and ideas, we have to make sure that we don't take that similar dogma and put it into our own lives. That's the part. Now there is other. I'm going to give you the two other things, and then I'm going to throw in a few scriptures, and then we'll call it a day about arguing and disagreeing, and kind of the points behind those. But there's excommunication. Okay, that's what we often see. And one of the things I've never liked about the church is this idea of excommunication. Is when someone has made a mistake or they've done something the church doesn't agree with, they excommunicate them. Now, there's something else called separation. Now, separation was, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this maybe next week, I'm not sure, but separation is what Malcolm X believed before he went to Mecca and came back. So the idea is that we'll have an area where we have black businesses and black policemen and black communities and like this, and then you have white communities and white policemen and white businesses, and you do this, and we will just separate. And when you give us an area, you stay in an area, and we're separate. So there's that. There's this complete separation, this complete division, and we just completely ignore the other. We stay out of their lives. No need for tolerance because we're not with one another. So there was that idea of separation that you can also have. So that's often when we hear things like that Robert Jones's thing is what he's kind of saying is like we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity. What he's saying is then there must be what it feels like to me is saying, well, we must just be separate. Because we're going to disagree one way or the other. We can disagree with protest signs. Or we're going to disagree verbally with one another. Now, some of us might not be at a point where we're strong enough to do that, where we're hurt and we're stuff like. I've been there and I understand that, and that's why I've gone to lots of different types of therapy and counseling and things like that. Another thing I would say, this is progress, not perfection. This doesn't happen overnight. I don't think this is some wild, crazy, euphoric dream of like, oh, well, I'll just sing like the Coke commercial used to be, like to buy the world a Coke. I'm not saying like that's what's going to happen. But it's this idea that if we really want to live in an equal society with equal rights and in freedom is messy. Equality is messy. There's going to be disagreements in equality. There's going to be disagreements with tolerance. I mean, tolerance, almost that's in the word. You're saying, I'm tolerating these people. And we often ask to be tolerated. I want to be included and accepted. I don't know about you guys. I think we all do. But we often say, well, at least give us tolerance. But then sometimes we're not really willing to give that back. You know, we don't want to give the tolerance back. We want to give the intolerance back. Like, we're going to be, you think you're intolerant? Wait till you see how intolerant I am. And I felt like this, and it really, I was like, James, and so I was trying to figure out how James Baldwin, when he said that, the reason I was looking it up wasn't to see if he said it or not. I was trying to see the context of where he said it and how he was saying it. Because I love James Baldwin. I watch all of his videos, and I've seen his videos and read some of his books. And so I was like, where did I miss this? And so I was looking up to find out if it was said in a book or a speech or a conversation, a Q&A, an interview, and then to realize that he never said it. So there's that. But so those are the other ideas. We excommunicate each other, or we just separate each other and ignore each other, and nothing changes. Now, we're not going to obviously live in a world where we can separate from people like that. We cannot take phone calls. We can do this, but we live in the real world. We live in humanity. We all subscribe to these different things where we see everybody's opinion, you know. So I think what we're going to have to learn is having discussions and disagreeing with others is kind of going to be part of, it's just a part of living as human beings, and that realizing that people have very different opinions than our own. And that's a hard thing to swallow. You know, we all talk about like our love for democracy, you know, but then when all of a sudden our guy doesn't, you know, the person we want to win doesn't win, and then all of a sudden we're kind of like, oh, this is democracy. You know, it's like, ooh. But it happens, you know, and it's like, oh, guess we have to accept the fact that, you know, our thinking is different than other people's thinking. And that's often, you know, a hard realization. I have opinions on those things, but there right now isn't that time for that opinion. Romans 12:18 says, where are you? Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble and in the sight of all. It is possible so far as it is dependent on you. If it's possible so far as it's dependent on yourself, live peaceable with all. And when I think it says live peaceable with all, obviously it doesn't mean you need to get walked on over day, or that you can't sit at the counter, or that you have to be at a different water fountain, or that your marriage is the same as my marriage. You know what I mean? Those aren't, that's not living peaceable. Living peaceable is living an equal life. But what it's saying here is, when you disagree with them, don't disagree in a way that stoops to that level. You know, don't let, Dr. King said, don't let anyone pull you low enough to hate them. You know, and he said the true nature of love is when you see an enemy suffering and you have the ability to be the last straw of their suffering and destroy them, and you don't do it. So that's also following Jesus. That is following Christ. That's being a Christian, in my opinion. That's why I still use that term, because I believe that's what it is. 1 Peter. I feel like that's a book I don't spend a lot, obviously don't spend a lot of time in. No highlights. I need to go, maybe need to go in there and read a little bit more. This is a newer Bible. My last one got lost, but somebody returned it like a month later, but it had been sitting in water, unfortunately. 1 Peter 3:15. Bear with me for a second. Says, but in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an account for the hope that is in you. But yet do it with gentleness and reverence. Keep your conscience clear, so that when you are mangled by those who abuse you for your good conduct in Christ may be put to shame. So once again, he's saying argue well, but do it with kindness. Don't allow your anger, don't allow your pain, don't allow this to be reason for them to say, oh, see, I told you so. You know, now this is hard. It's hard to take the narrow road. It's hard to take these things, but it's something that we're all going to have to learn to do. And I think I'm preparing you for the next 4 years of what we're about to go into, because I think there will be protesting. I think there will maybe be riots. I think there will be some tough times ahead. And I think we've got to say, like, is nonviolence really a way and an option? I believe nonviolence is, for me, the only option. I believe loving my enemy is the option. But that doesn't mean I don't argue with them. It doesn't mean I don't disagree with them. It doesn't mean I don't, it means I try to disagree well with them. I disagree better with them, because it's not just me who is losing rights or suffering, but it's so many others. And so we can protest with our signs, but we can also protest with our conversations. And it might take a little bit of dying to our flesh and ourselves, of not demanding our own way or being arrogant and rude or angry, which I know is tough. But the fact is we have to say, do I want to make a point or do I want to make a difference? I think that's an important thing to. And do I want to learn more about how others see me? Because imagine that, if we learn how people who are critiquing us see us, then we're able to better disagree. We're able to disagree, to bring our case, to show these things. Well, we shouldn't have to bring our case. Well, no, we probably shouldn't in a perfect world, but we don't live in a perfect world, obviously. If we were in a perfect world, Tammy Fan Broadway would run 100 years. And we wouldn't have to have a president. We would just all smell roses and drink Diet Coke and eat Southern food. Eat fried green tomatoes. One more, and then I'll leave you with this. Supposedly, I keep saying that I will, but maybe I'll talk for a few more minutes. I hope if this moves you today, because there's only very few of us here today, I hope if this moves you today that you will share it with others and that you'll tell others about this talk. If you see people who maybe posting this and say, hey, you could say, hey, that's Robert Jones who said that, Jr. in 2015. Or if someone says, well, I can't agree to disagree, well, maybe you can say, hey, I've heard this talk about this kind of different levels of what it means to agree, what it means to disagree, what it means to agree to disagree, what it means to disagree well, what it means to argue, what it means to argue well, that kind of thing. And share that with those, because I think this is tools for the future, tools for our everyday life. Matthew. Am I in Matthew? I am in Matthew. I believe it was really hard for me not to go into Galatians today, but we're getting ready in January to do our Galatians study again. So Galatians. Matthew 5:44 says, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. 43 says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies, which I see a lot of us doing right now. And we do it in ways where we even try to belittle the other. It's really strange. I don't like the kind of like monitor, like the this, I'm so prideful and I'm over you, but it's like, so you're stupid and I'm right, and it just doesn't change. Like, we need change. We desperately need change. Like, we've got to be the change we want to see. That's up to us. I wish I could say, like, well, you can sit on the sidelines, we'll take care of it. But like, there's 9 of us listening, counting me 10, there's 10 of us here, guys, we got to live this. This is called to live this. 4 likes, 9 followers. What's going on? Does that mean half of you don't agree with me? You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. How do we do that? It says love your enemies. It doesn't say you have to like those who are persecuting you. Of course not. But to love them is saying they're worth my time, they're worth my case, they're worth to be someone I can disagree with and argue with. There's also one I can listen to and maybe find out, how my enemy sees me, how those who disagree with me, why they disagree with me, and what their view is of me. And that allows us to have a deeper understanding and a deeper relationship with that person, and can lead us to a greater discussion to see how others see us. And remember, when we refuse to disagree and we avoid all this conflict, it inevitably either leads to war, separation, or excommunication. And I think war is more likely. even if it's just a war of words and violence of words. It might not be violence of fists and weapons, but it might be violence of words or violence in our heart and hate in our heart. And I'll tell you what, hate, I don't know who said this, but hate's like, drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, And one of the reasons I let my father meet with Jerry Falwell after I met with Jerry Falwell when I was about 16 years old is not because I told Jerry Falwell I forgive him, but he was like, well, thank you for forgiving me for whatever you think I did. I mean, it was the worst, it was not an apology at all, but had nothing to do with that, how he, that he gave any satisfactory answers. It was how I knew that my father needed to have that moment to forgive someone, even if they didn't want to be forgiven, what that power led to. That's one thing both of my parents taught me, was the power of forgiveness. Very strange, especially if you see my dad's work today, you'd think something different. And Shane argued that with me, and I said, yeah, but my dad's the one who taught me about forgiveness. I mean, that's just how life works. It's difficult and strange and unique, and we really all need to save our applause or our critique until the end, till the end of the show. So that's my discussion today is on that. And so I think agreeing to disagree it can be great for a lot of things. And this is where I agree with Robert Jones Jr.'s tweet is, in some ways but I would say we can agree to disagree and, still love each other unless your disagreement is, because I think if that disagreement is rooted in that oppression and denial, then I think that's the time we have to disagree and we have to argue well. And we can't agree to disagree on something like that. And so that's why I've always spoken up. I remember my mother being like, I'm afraid when I said I want to be an ally, I want to be affirming, I want to tell everybody I think it's okay to be gay, And my mom goes, well, can't you just do it and not say it? And I knew that I couldn't be silent anymore. I had to say it. And that's the point of disagreeing, is it has to be said. Eventually it has to just be done. I mean, look how celebrated her actions are, but I had to say those words. I had to make it clear to say, I'm not going to let this be, this is who I am, this is what I believe, and here I am. And here I stand. Martin Luther the Reformer. I can do no other. But here I stand amongst his accusers. And I think that this is the best way forward. I think this is the best way for us to see lives change and people change. And I hope we're able to allow others to exist even when we disagree with them. Because the people we're disagreeing with, I disagree often with people who have completely different theologies than me sometimes, who don't believe in what I believe at all and think I believe in fairy tales. But it doesn't make they have a right to live their life and be who they are. I'm going to disagree with them because I have that right as well, but I'm going to disagree in a way that hopefully is fruitful and not in a way that is horrific. So, and I would say to my more conservative friends, if you don't believe in my LGBTQ rights, friends, or some of the things I say, but you have to realize that we do exist, people do exist. I'm not LGBTQ, but I do exist, and they exist, and we are here, and we live in a country that's free, and hopefully we can learn to respect one another and say, there you are, and I see you, and you have these rights, and I'm grateful that you have these rights because I have these rights, because next time it might be your rights that are on the line. These are often things to think about, as how we love our neighbor as ourselves, and why does Jesus say our neighbor is our enemy? These are things to take to our heart and to our conscience. So I want to thank you all today for joining us at Revolution. I do have to give the quick pitch at the end. We really do need your support. You can go to revolutionchurch.com and make a financial donation there. It's tax deductible. It's the end of the year. So if you want to get those tax deductible donations in, we could really use it. I only got half of my pay this month, and honestly I can't live that way. I've got work on I've got a job, I work tomorrow watching Christmas trees, so I take jobs when I can get them and ever how I can get them. So that'll be happening tomorrow. That'll be fun. It's not even open. I'm just making sure I'm there to make sure no one takes them or comes in. I didn't think I'd be doing that at 49 or 48. I'm not 49 yet. That's December 18th. But we really could use your support and your donations. We could really use you also sharing this stuff with each other and sharing this online and stuff like that. I know I ask every week, but I've only seen 2 or 3 of you doing it. So there's like 10, there's 11 of us right now. Share it. Let people know what we're doing. Get the word out there. It really helps bring the community together. And we really do need one another right now. This is, this is the time that a lot of us have prepared for or feel unprepared for, but this is the preparation we've got to have. We've got to live in a world where we have a lot of different people thinking, and now it's time for us. We've asked for tolerance, and now it's time for us to show some tolerance, but also be able to argue our case well and do that and make a change in this world for the best and for love. And so please love one another, show grace to one another, and love yourself as well. And I will see you next week. Once again, you can help us at revolutionchurch.com. Thank you so much, everybody. I will see you next Sunday here, same time, same bat channel. And have a wonderful Thanksgiving week if you celebrate it, and enjoy it and enjoy your family. And you can practice this. I'm not doing anything for Thanksgiving, but you're going to be with family. So guess what? I just gave you how to survive Thanksgiving guide. Like, test this on your family. You're going to get pissed off either way, so you might as well test it with them, right? Love you guys. Have a great week. Bye-bye. Oh, it doesn't